In the research that I was doing, I have found your work in the beginning of the year, your exhibition with the turtles, that I found very, very touching. And then I was searching for more of your work, and I thought maybe it's also interesting to see borders in the context of climate change and climate crisis, how you see borders and how you see them in this context of climate change.
I'm thinking where to start. First of all, it's an older work related with Cape Verdean Islands. So I think it touches the theme of borders in terms of migration. Although there the borders are really geographical, they are not only imagined ones, because there are islands in the middle of the ocean. So they really exist, whether we draw them. We draw the line or we don't. On the positive side, I had to remake part of the work right now for an exhibition which actually touches both themes that you mentioned: the environment, the climate change, and borders and migration. Scientifically, it's always hard to say which natural event is caused by climate change and which one is not. And Cape Verdean Islands, they were always quite dry islands, and the people were very dependent on whether it rains or it doesn't. It's obvious that in last years there are less years with rain, because usually if it rains, it only rains in a very short period, or even like once per year, or like a short period of year, and some years it doesn't rain at all. And lately there are much more of the years when it doesn't rain. And it, of course, I mean, in general, it interested me because I was researching a lot the theme of climate change. I became a little bit an activist in Slovakia. Now I'm not that active, and it always interested me, this situation that it's mostly the northern hemisphere world that is causing most of the effects of climate change. And it's hard to say if the effects are mostly in the global south or southern hemisphere, but definitely, the people feel it much more, and the people who are less privileged always feel it more strongly. So I mean, even as I'm speaking, we have, maybe in Poland too, we have super hot days after a cold period. Like it's really, really hot, but lots of the people, when it will be unbearable, they will buy the air conditioning, and it will be solved for some time. We will cause more trouble by doing it, but yeah. So Cape Verdean Islands are interesting, and that's also from the perspective of borders, because it became a part of the culture to migrate. I mean, there are two things. One is the social element, there is the environmental element, but it's also like a cultural thing, because they are living in very small islands, and it's almost like an act of going into the world. So for generations, people used to move out once it was possible, because it was a colony, of course. It was a colony of Portugal, and people used to move now they move a lot to Portugal, because they mostly speak the language, and also because there is already very large community in Portugal that welcomes them there. And also they go to other parts of Europe and USA. Some of them they return, some of them don't. It's very usual, and that's also, of course, not typical only for Cape Verdes, that the people who work abroad, they send some amount of money back, and this is actually a very large part of the national economy. Sometimes it's even the largest part of the economy, the money that is sent back by the people who live and work abroad.
And how do you see climate change influence or reshape like physical borders and political borders?
Well, this is something, just a thing that popped out to my mind right at the moment, and I'm really sorry because I cannot be very exact, but I heard the story of a glacier line, I think, in between Austria and Italy, where there is real border that is drawn according to this glacier line, and the glacier is disappearing. So this is a very specific situation when climate change is shifting geographical border in such a sense. Of course, I mean, then there is another thing typical for certain islands, that the water levels are changing. The ocean line is also changing. So in this way, maybe they can change the geographical border. But on the other hand, I mean, when it's kind of like an obvious answer, but that nature really doesn't know borders. So I would say that it's more typical that the climate change affects basically all the areas. It doesn't respect these imaginary lines that we created. Thinking about another story that I usually tell, which came to me by an accident. I made another work in a long time ago in Dallas, in Texas. It was a kind of like a megaphone that was supposed to be like a sculptural audio piece to reflect the stories of people from Latin America and mostly from Mexico, like a Latin community in Dallas. And I interviewed one person who was, or maybe is, a cook. I don't know his name because actually right now he might be in a very difficult situation because he was illegal migrant but living for I don't know, maybe 10 or 20 years in US already, having his family there and a job. And he was telling me this story. He tried several times to enter US, and it's always difficult, of course, like passing through like not being seen by the border police, going through basically a desert or a very dry area. And he told that he decided to move because they used to plant corn and beans, and they had several years when it started to get drier and drier, and they could not basically survive from what they were producing. So it was kind of obvious he had to move. For me, it had also a bit of and I in any way, I don't want to be critical because it's just totally understandable. It's kind of interesting that these same people, they enter US and the lifestyle in US, it's such high in carbon footprint that is actually making things worse. It was interesting. He was a cook, and he very clearly told that right now, I mean, it was already years ago when I interviewed him, that he already understands that the reasons for these changes, it was a climate change. In that moment when he decided to move, he didn't know the reason, but right now he understands it. So, I mean, this is maybe the story that is directly touching the borders.
In your work, this is what I read. I haven't seen it personally, but correct me if I'm wrong. In your work, We Are the Garden, you talk about these changes that happen, slowly, and people somehow get used to it. And it makes me think that the more we wait, then the harder it's going to be to work with these issues and limitations. And I wonder, do you see time being a border in this sense?
Yeah, it's an interesting view now when speaking of in the aspect of environmental changes and climate change. Yeah, in terms of time, we are always passing the now, maybe we can perceive the border as the line of point of no return. For example, this could maybe make sense. Maybe this is a similar illustration as what you mentioned. But yeah, there is a fluency in that, and that's also maybe a bit a problem that the climate scientists are dealing with. That they have to draw the lines, but the lines that they create, they are based on science, but that there is some level of mental decision that here is the line that we cannot cross. This was maybe like a double sword of the climate activism, like the line of the 1.5 degrees Celsius. In some way it really helped, or the line of the year, like the 2050 or 2040 as the last resort of climate neutrality. At some point, people started to be worried. It really helped for the general public to understand that this is not a laughing matter, and that we are really close to some tipping point. On the other hand, then it might happen that people lose the interest, or we cross the point and we still somehow, we don't perceive that change as so direct. It's not like that when we enter 1.5 degree, we are in hell we are going into hell continuously. The same thing with years. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder also what forms of climate activism you can take without like compromising the artistic value of the work.
That's a big dilemma, and I was balancing on these two sides, and sometimes I think that it's better not to mix them totally together, and I really. Well, maybe I don't know. I guess you know the current cultural and political situation in Slovakia. So right now we are in the moment when now I'm moving to another subject, which is the situation of culture in Slovakia. But almost everyone in my cultural bubble is worried and is participating in some form of harder or lighter activism. And I respect the people who have this thing totally divided. They create artworks that have nothing to do with the activism, and then they do activism as a separate activity. And of course, there is always, at least that's what I feel around here, that if the work enters very much an activist form, that it's very easy to fall into some kind of, I don't know how to say, like a visual propaganda, or where the artistic value is disputable. I don't think it's not possible to do a good artivism or art activism. I know some good examples.
But how would you also approach institutions? Because from my experience, institutions don't really want to support so much climate activism, or like even, of course, in an artistic form, but somehow there's not so much interest for it. I don't know what's your experience, and if you have, like, how do you approach institutions?
I think that depends. I even would say that there was a wave of, but maybe it's not right to call it climate activism in art, but there was a period when lots of artists, not here, but also globally, addressed the theme. And it was something that was in the air, that I think in art it happened parallelly with journalism, with science, with global politics. So it was kind of natural that even the art institutions that wanted to bring actual subjects into the shows, that they were actually interested in that form of art. Yeah, I wanted to say, because to your previous question, it was for me just interesting now with this theme of cultural protests, that there was actually in Slovakia quite strong discussions caused by one article in a journal, in a national journal, why there is not more art activism fighting for the culture in today's situation, kind of like oppression from the government and really big cuts and changes. And I was thinking about it. I was almost feeling like it's my obligation, as I am related, first of all, with activism and climate activism, and second of all, with culture. But I realized that some situations are very hard for me to translate into an artwork, and even maybe more when we are touched so directly, and like now the cuts affected many people very close to me who worked in cultural institutions, and it's easier for me to imagine to be part of the regular protest than to create an artwork about it. I'm afraid of becoming like generically saying something that is already said.
Do you see hope as something that breaks borders, or something that creates more borders, and that maybe is seen as naivety?
I would never. Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think that, right now I cannot imagine in which way hope could create borders, unless we imagine maybe some two kinds of groups that have hope in such an opposite outcome, that in that case maybe it can create borders. Well, and maybe then we are touching another subject, which is the borders created by polarization all around the world. But in general, yeah, I cannot see hope as creating borders. On the contrary, I think that, and even like in this sense that we are living in a very polarized society, I think that in some way, even people that live in a very different poles of opinions, that if we will make some distillation of what we hope for, I think that it would maybe create less borders than more. That in some deep level, I think that people are wishing for some dignity and solidarity and a community and respect and so on.